Since I regularly deal with so many online skeptics these days, I've come to the sad conclusion that most of them tragically suffer from ARCS, which is an abbreviation for the technical term anti-religious cliche sloganism, or even its more progressive form, DSO, which is short for Dawkinitis Silly Objectionism, which has most likely prompted its victims to already have hit the dislike button by the time they've even reached this point in the video.
Surely you can't be serious.
I am serious. And don't call me Shirley.
Hello, everyone. I'm Professor Plank. I respond to various theological and ideological questions and claims from a rationalistic and naturalistic approach in an effort to give and explain the opposite viewpoint and help to balance the conversation. Today, we're going to be hearing from John McCrae of the channel What Do You Meme?, where he regularly offers Christian commentary on current events, politics, and celebrity culture, things that I generally don't give a rip about. I mean, I honestly couldn't care less how this guy thinks Christians should view the rise of Taylor Swift or the fall of Kanye West by looking through a Christian lens. But he does have occasional videos where he dips his toes into talking about atheists, atheism in general, and skepticism. And that is his video that we're going to be looking at today. And right off the bat, he starts with a blatant example of every accusation being a confession by claiming that it's skeptics and atheists who quickly devolve into spouting slogans and cliches, when in fact that's all Christians do, all day, every day. I mean, honestly, look at the trees. Why is there something rather than nothing? A building needs a builder. A painting needs a painter. If you found a watch on the ground, you'd know it had a designer, right? Look at the trees! You believe the universe exploded out of nothing? But everything is so fine-tuned for us. The Bible says such and the Bible is always right, so therefore God. How can you not think there's a God? I mean, come on! You know, a fool has said in his heart that there is no God. Hey, have you looked at those trees yet? You know, if we evolved from monkeys, why are there still monkeys? It's nothing but slogan city out of the mouths of most Christians and practically all apologists. And then, as an atheist, when you try to explain to them why their question is messed up in its formation, or why their underlying assumptions are fallacious, if the explanation lasts more than 2 sentences, they'll often get bored, stop paying attention, insist that you're just spouting a bunch of science-y gobbledygook, and walk away feeling like they won the argument. So, you're not off to a great start trying to convince the audience that they shouldn't find skeptics convincing, John, with this nonsensical attempt at an uno reverso. But perhaps you might come up with something more substantive as we go on. So, let's get stuck in and hear John out about why non-believers shouldn't be listened to. But before we get to that, if you end up liking what you see in this video and would like to help out the channel, make sure to subscribe, click the bell so you'll always be notified when new content comes out. Check out my social media, including my Patreon, Twitter, and Blue Sky. I'll link below in the description. And of course, like this video, pop in a comment. All that goes a long way towards pleasing the YouTube algorithm, that incomparable instigator of enmity among ecclesiastical idiots, incentivizing iconoclasm and intellect over idolatry, may keep my channel motoring along. Now on to today's video.
There's an old joke that goes something like this. There was a man who was convinced that he was dead, but in reality he was very much alive. His delusion became such a problem that his family paid for him to see a psychiatrist. He took out his medical books and proceeded to show the man that dead men do not bleed. Ah, very well then, the doctor said as he took out a needle and pricked the man's finger. So he asked the man, he said, "Ah, now what does that tell you?" And the man says, "Oh my goodness." And then he continued to stare at his finger in disbelief and said, "I guess dead men bleed after all."
You're welcome, by the way, dear viewers. I cut that joke way, way down. John had it ridiculously too long and drawn out, especially given that it wasn't even a particularly funny joke to begin with. I mean, yeah, humor is subjective and all, but, well, for starters, this thing in the joke is an actual mental condition. It's not just fodder for humor. It's called Cotard syndrome, and there are really people who exist who are afflicted with the delusion of thinking that they are dead. And, you know, it's generally not funny to make fun of a person's affliction. It's kind of punching down. But then also, if you're gonna unnecessarily draw out the setup of a joke, the punchline better be one hell of a humdinger. But this was barely a punchline, given that that is precisely what a person with Cotard syndrome would have said. Oh, I guess dead men do bleed. I mean, if their delusion persists despite them walking around, talking, breathing, eating, going to the bathroom and the like, why wouldn't their delusion continue just because you pricked their finger and they bled? So, yeah, can we get past the stand-up comedy and get to your point, John?
So now the point of the joke, of course, is that people can be so committed to what they don't want to believe that they'll ignore or reshape all of the evidence that goes against the things that they don't like.
Once again, every accusation is a confession. This is practically word for word what one of the most common criticisms of believers from non-believers is. A person being so committed to what they want to believe that they'll ignore or reshape the evidence that goes against what they do like. It's actually a blending of two logical fallacies. One, the argument from incredulity fallacy, which is concluding that because you can't or refuse to believe something, it must not be true, or the argument must be flawed. This is a specific form of the argument from ignorance. And then that's backed up by the sunk cost fallacy, which is reasoning that further investment is warranted on the fact that the resources already invested will be lost otherwise, not taking into consideration the overall losses involved in further investment. So basically, when scientific explanations for the existence of the universe or the formation of life without need to appeal to a god are offered, the religious will often refuse to believe it because they've sunk so much time, energy, effort, and mental work into a religious mindset and worldview, and thus any argument that contradicts that religious mindset must automatically be flawed. This is why they so frequently misunderstand things like evolution, natural selection, abiogenesis, Big Bang cosmology, biological determinism, social construction theory, or even simple run-of-the-mill chemistry. So committed are they to the notion that God did it all through his God magic that they'd prefer to languish in their ignorance because the very idea of being wrong terrifies them beyond their willingness to even seriously consider non-God options as a viable possibility.
Now, this is somewhat human nature. We all do this to some certain extent in some cases, but it's made far worse when, like the man in the story, they don't offer any positive reasons for why they're correct.
Except that we do. All the time. Secular, non-magical, non-God-related reasons are given for just about everything. I mean, I ran through a bunch of them already. Evolution, natural selection, abiogenesis, Big Bang cosmology, biological determinism, social construction theory, or even simple run-of-the-mill chemistry. All of which are vastly more reasonable with loads and loads of evidence to back them up than anything the God Squad pushes, which, by the way, never seems to amount to anything more than God did it. And if pressed to get more specific, a host of more religious slogans fall out of their mouths. He moves in mysterious ways. He is the Alpha and the Omega. Ours is not to reason why. His ways are above our ways, and so we're not meant to understand them. All amounting to magic. There, I explained it, and I don't have to explain it any further than that. And magic makes more sense to me than any of that science gobbledygook you just said, so therefore I win. John, your argument against atheism has thus been, you can be so committed to a position that you're unwilling to consider that you may be wrong, and then you don't offer any better reasoning. That's what you've said atheists do, but how do you not see that you're talking about your average religious believer? Take something like evolution. Explaining with mountains of evidence how humans evolved from a more simian-like primate ancestor, and the average creationist is so dedicated to the idea of the Garden of Eden creation story that they won't even seriously consider that they might be wrong. And when asked to provide a valid alternative, they give nothing but the story of God magicking humans into existence from dirt and ribs. How do you not see that you're actually telling on your own side?
This leaves them especially open to being deceived by others and deceiving themselves without even realizing it. Now, instead of giving reasons for their beliefs, they subconsciously seek to only find ways to rationalize or reject all of the evidence that goes against what they don't want to believe. And this leads us to the first reason that a lot of atheists and skeptics might sound persuasive even though they shouldn't. It's far easier to deny something than to argue for something.
Like denying evolution, denying the old age of the Earth, denying the Big Bang, denying linguistic drift and instead insisting on the divergence of language being the result of a curse on people for building a tower that couldn't have been more than 7 or 8 stories tall, yet that same God couldn't seem to care less that we now regularly make buildings over 100 stories tall. Denying that natural selection resulted in striped animals, and instead insisting that it's all because their non-striped ancestors mated in front of striped branches. Denying that the planet, and all the planets, takes millions of years to form, and instead insisting on a literal 7 days, all magic together by a being whose magic ways we just can't understand. Now, not all religious people argue against all of these things, of course. There are religious people who are occasionally willing to look at evidence and accept reality. But there are all too many who reject all of these things in favor of what they want to desperately cling to. And now, you're trying to put all this on atheists. Like we're the ones rejecting something and yet offering nothing in its place. What are you even talking about? I mean, it would be nice if you would give a single example, like I've given several. Typically, the only thing atheists reject is the idea that God did anything. And it's predicated on the fact that we don't need God to explain anything. You say that we offer nothing in the place of the rejection of God. Well, what do you expect? For us to instead propose some other magical being doing things through unexplainable magic? Well, then we would just be trading in one type of theism for another. But we don't do that. We're atheists. We don't believe in any God or gods. And we don't need any God to explain anything. We've been doing just fine with explaining the natural universe in natural terms. We didn't need God to explain where the sun went after it set. We didn't need God to explain what causes people to get sick. We didn't need God to explain where humans and all the life on this planet came from. And we don't need God to explain anything in the universe around us. So, frankly, we've replaced the notion of God with something else. The natural forces of the natural world behaving naturally. And we've plenty of evidence to support that. In fact, all of the evidence supports that.
This first reason has to do with the fact that atheists have recently incorporated a definition of atheism that's foreign to the historical philosophical definition of the word atheism. So now, it used to be that atheism meant that you believe that the proposition, God does not exist, is a true proposition. But unfortunately, that position requires a decent amount of critical thinking, and it would also come with the burden of proof.
No. Mm-mm. No. Hell no. No. I refuse. No.
This again? Oh, atheism used to mean believing that there was no God, and now atheists have changed it to mean just lacking a belief. It's not fair. Atheists used to have a burden of proof. No, John. The historical definition of atheism was not a positive assertion that God does not exist. Atheism is, and always has been, literally atheism. Theism meaning the belief in a God, and a meaning literally without. So, the word atheism literally means without a belief in God. And then, you say it philosophically means believing that no God exists. Well, apologists have been trying to argue that little nugget for a long time too. And they'll often cite and cherry-pick philosophy dictionaries to insist that atheism is a positive claim. Well, according to the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, the word atheism is polysemous. It has multiple related meanings. In the psychological sense of the word, atheism is a psychological state, specifically the state of being an atheist. where an atheist is defined as someone who is not a theist, and a theist is defined as someone who believes that God exists or that there are gods. This generates the following definition: atheism is the psychological state of lacking the belief that God exists. And that's where the definition begins. That's top of the paragraph. Now, I won't dishonestly cherry pick, and I will admit that the entry goes on to also give a different definition of atheism as a positive claim. That's part of what it means for a word to be polysemous, to have more than one definitive meaning. Look, atheism was not redefined at some secret conclave of atheists in a hollowed-out volcano lair to make your life as an apologist harder. There has always been the understanding that there are positive and negative atheists, that there are people who do assert that no God exists, and there are those who make no such assertion, but just do not accept the assertion that God does exist. And if that makes your position harder because now you have a burden of proof that the negative atheists do not, well...
Too bad, so sad, bye-bye.
And it's not like those of us offering non-theistic explanations for everything in the universe have no burden of proof. We have to prove things all the time. We have to prove evolution and the common ancestry of humans and other apes. And we have to prove the age of the earth. And we have to prove the age of the universe. And we even offer proofs to refute unproven creationist assertions, like Noah's Ark, which we debunk in 100 different ways. From showing how the math doesn't work for what creatures could have reasonably fit on an ark versus how much space would be needed for food for all of them, to how impossible it would be to start from one spot where the ark would have made landfall to the propagation of all the species on the earth. Also dozens of other ways that we prove that one wrong. We prove the global flood wrong. We prove the Garden of Eden myth wrong. Even when we don't have a burden of proof, we tend to go ahead and disprove the creationist assertion anyway. We prove and prove and prove all the time. We prove passage after passage of the Bible wrong. We prove religious dogma wrong. We offer secular explanations to virtually everything and then do the legwork to prove them right time and again. And when you apologists are backed into the corner with only one thing left that we've not conclusively proven wrong about religion, that being the very existence of a God that by the nature of the way that you've concocted him can't be disproven, and is the very definition of an unfalsifiable claim, you toss your head back and laugh and insist that you've won the debate because we can't prove the literal unprovable. And even all of that would be fine. But then you have the gall to make a video insisting that atheists prove nothing, that we obstinately refuse to accept theist claims out of nothing but an unwillingness to believe, and that we offer nothing in place of theistic God claims?
No way, never. Presumptuous little shit.
Now, instead of holding to the historical definition of atheism, they prefer the definition of atheism being nothing more than a mere lack of belief, which means that you could literally be as dumb as a brick and still be an atheist, since you don't have to actually believe anything in order to qualify as an atheist. You only need to lack a belief in order to qualify as an atheist.
Where, oh where, could we have possibly gotten such an outlandish, insane, off-the-wall notion that atheism, again, literally, without a belief in God, could possibly mean lacking a belief in God? Dictionary.com says disbelief or lack of belief in the existence of God or gods. Merriam-Webster, a lack of belief or a strong disbelief in the existence of a god or any gods. Britannica.com, atheism in general, the critique and denial of metaphysical beliefs in God or spiritual beings. And to be clear, denying a belief is not to insist that the belief is wrong. It is just to deny adopting such a belief in oneself. Or in other words, to lack a belief. Atheist.org says, atheism is not an affirmative belief that there is no God, nor does it answer any other question about what a person believes. It is simply a rejection of the assertion that there are gods. Atheism is too often defined incorrectly as a belief system. To be clear, Atheism is not a disbelief in gods or a denial of gods. It is a lack of belief in gods. I'll say it again, John. This is not a concerted effort by nefarious atheist villains to be able to pwn apologists in debates by absolving ourselves of the burden of proof. My negative atheism is not a convenient way of dodging the responsibility of having to validate my assertions with evidence. For shit's sake, I make video after video validating my positions as an atheist all the time. No, I am an agnostic atheist because of two things. One, I'm honest and I won't adopt a label or tie myself to a claim that I don't believe in. And two, I honestly do not assert that no such being which could be labeled as a god exists, but only that I see no evidence of such a being or reason to conclude that such a being does exist. Therefore, I reject the assertion that God does exist and lack a belief in any god or gods. And again, John, if my lack of belief in any god or gods distresses you, well...
Here's me on the scale of caring. I'm at 0. Therefore, since negative caring is impossible, or rather is simply caring of another sort, love and hate being different sides of the same coin, etc., etc., I couldn't care less.
Now, I'm not a hater. I always give props where props are due, so I'm not going to sit here and act like their position doesn't come with any benefits. Using the definition of atheism being only a lack of belief allows them to demand simple answers to complex questions and then label the complex answer as word salad. That the definition allows them to frame the conversation in a way where they don't have to give arguments or defend anything that they actually believe. They can just sit back and do their best to poke holes in arguments, never giving an alternate explanation, while the entire time feeling like they're actually doing something worthwhile.
Wow, wow, wow. The projection is strong with this one. We demand simple answers to complex questions, you say? Well, how's this for a complex question? How did humans get here? Secular answers to such a question go into examinations of amino acids and proteins, nucleotides, the formation of RNA and how it can become DNA, the change in allele frequencies over time in response to environmental factors and pressures, and 3.5 billion years worth of changes replete with global mass extinction events, planetary and climate changes, ice ages to get from protocells to the diversification of life on this planet. No, F that! God magicked it all into existence and made a dirt sculpture of a person, and boom, Adam! Took a rib out of him, and boom, Eve! All that crap you just said was science-y word salad. And I mean, do I really need to go through all the examples of this same pattern between the secular explanations for things being vastly more complex than the theistic ones, and then theists roundly rejecting it as word salad? And who is it who really doesn't have to give actual arguments or evidence to back up what they really believe, when one of the two sides can always just default back to, well, you just have to take it on faith. God is testing our faith. Divine hiddenness. Those fossils were placed there by the devil to trick us and make us stray away from God. I believe it's true because I feel that it's true. And that feeling must have come from God. Therefore, I'm right, and you can't convince me otherwise. Honestly, how much of apologist rhetoric, when it comes to verbally sparring with atheists, amounts to, well, Psalm 14:1 says, "The fool hath said in his heart, there is no God. They are corrupt. They've done abominable works. There is none that doeth good. So I know you're corrupt and just trying to make me doubt my faith. You're the bad guy. So you lose, I win. I've got God on my side." So that was all John really had to say about why atheists and skeptics shouldn't be convincing. I mean, this really was a masterclass in saying as little as possible in the longest time possible. I seriously cut out probably 6 minutes of this 8.5-minute video because he was just repeating the same thing in slightly different language. He just kept reiterating that atheists offer nothing and reject the good arguments and evidence for God over and over again. And I kept waiting for him to give a single example of this as a basic illustration of what he was talking about, but no such example ever came. And this is one of the ways you know that a person's full of shit, when they can't even illustrate their point. You may have noticed that I gave example after example of secular arguments and evidence that contradict religious beliefs and the religious practitioners' refusal to accept them, like the Big Bang and evolution and the length of time the Earth took to form, the natural formation of life, how science seeks out and finds vast swaths of evidence for these hypotheses until we have enough that they can become scientific theories, which is the highest form of scientific proof and confidence that exists. Only to have theists say the equivalent of, "Nuh-uh, 'cause my holy book says that's not what happened." And yet, John kept insisting, without evidence or a single example, that it's in fact non-believers who do this sort of thing, not the theists. In fact, the entire video was pure projection and telling on his own side. I mean, he starts off saying that atheists devolve into nothing but slinging atheistic slogans that they've heard elsewhere and offer them in lieu of real arguments. He didn't offer a single example of what these atheist slogans were, but then I came back with a litany of religious slogans that get shouted around by apologists on a daily basis. John then insisted that atheists stubbornly adhere to their atheistic beliefs because they just don't want to be wrong, and refuse to even consider the evidence against their position. He didn't offer a single example of what that supposed evidence for God and against the atheistic position is, but I came back with numerous examples of scientifically verified and established theories and evidence that contradict the theistic worldview, evidence that theists will often refuse to even consider. John then chastised the lack of belief definition of atheism, even though it is backed up by every defining organization in the world, including the very philosophical academic texts that he insisted don't include such a definition. Which he basically only did because he found it to be a real effing buzzkill that his side, being the ones that are actually making claims, have to, shocker, back up those claims. And then he finished off with insisting that atheists declare any explanation that we don't like as word salad and dismissing it out of hand. When again, that's what practically every theist does when the evidence contradicts what they want to believe about their God idea. Well, John, how's this for some word salad for you?
Yes? Well, I'm polymerized tree sap, and you're an inorganic adhesive, so whatever verbal projectile you launch in my direction is reflected off of me, returns on its original trajectory, and adheres to you.
And so that is where we'll end things for today. So thanks for watching, everyone. Don't forget to like this video, comment, and subscribe so you'll always be notified when a new video comes out. Check me out on Twitter, and more specifically on Blue Sky now, and Patreon if you'd like to support my work directly. My Teespring if you want some Plinky merchandise, all that link below in the description. Special shout out to my most recent super thankers here on YouTube, Salvi Mike and Powell B. Until next time, I'm Professor Plink reminding you to keep striving for greater understanding. It's the best way to get wherever you want to go.